Doing nothing, no placards, nothing like that, just quietly witnessing the procedures, showing that this is an important thing. It's a single, if we can get the jury system to function the way it should, and I constantly say this, right, we're meant to be in a democracy, right? And there's a pyramid, there's a hierarchy of power. At the top is meant to be the people, that's us, right? All of us, the people. A jury is a microcosm of the people, right? The people are meant to elect a parliament, which then creates institutions like the court to enact the laws. But the hierarchy of power puts the people at top. The jury returns that power to the people by using jury nullification, or the right of a jury to give a verdict against the facts on their conscience, right? You put the people back in control. We don't like these drug laws. Nullify them, ignore them. Give the people not guilty. Do you follow the argument? Right? But, hey? 9 o'clock. Yeah. It would be really good. Drag anyone along, wheelchairs, crutches, bandages, I don't care. You can't get anything done quietly. I mean, at some stage you've got to put yourself out there. Now, I appreciate most people aren't sort of loudmouth activists. That's all right. I mean, we take all different sorts. But every now and then we need bums on seats. And this is a time when we need bums on seats, right? Make an effort, make it into a holiday, go do something, drag along the family and friends, and just respectfully and sincerely witness the events so the media can't ignore it. Okay, that's my request here. Is there any more questions?
One more, please.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doctor. Just a question about the World Health Organisation. Do we have allies there?
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not in the inner circle by a long way. There is a fair movement. Remember, the prohibition was set up by the Americans, and if you've seen the documentary we made back in the $90 billion crop, it was to destroy the potential of natural fibres, especially hemp fibre, after the discovery of a hemp decorticator. So they brought in the cannabis ban, claiming it was a dangerous drug. That was a smokescreen to get rid of the industrial uses of hemp when nylon was being introduced, right? So there's been corporate sabotage, and the reason why we have a cannabis prohibition at all, that is sort of the narrative is falling apart. And there's talk that the schedule, the United Nations Single Convention on Drugs and Psychotropic Substances, be rewritten to exclude cannabis. We welcome that. That was meant to happen a year or two ago, but the Americans keep sort of throwing a spanner in the works. Even though the bastards have changed their laws, they don't want the world to do it. The pressure will build, but our policy, and it's coming to reality here, we overgrow the government. We don't wait for the government to change the laws, we overgrow the government, right? The amount of medicine coming out of New South Wales now is huge, and so we will simply overgrow the government, right? The impediments to reintroduction of industrial hemp are more logistic and financial at the moment. There's no legal impediment to having 1 million hectares. In the United States, and just to prove the point that they made cannabis illegal not because of medicine or not because of drug use, but because of industrials, they've had legal pot in some of the states for 20 years. They only legalised hemp farming, drug-free hemp farming last year, right? We have 600 acres of hemp in this whole country. In their second year, they put 60,000 hectares in, right? So we look forward to a massive resurgence of big-scale hemp farming, and that'll make it harder and harder for them to maintain the lie of the prohibition. Remember, it was brought into the convention as a dangerous plant with no medical use. That's what they said, dangerous plant with no medical use. And yet what we've got now is a plant of almost infinite medical blessings, both short-term and long-term, right? As well as all the industrial and earth healing things. There's really nothing like it. I mean, the advantages agriculturally are massive, and we've established this under Australian condition. You grow a hemp crop in a paddock, the next year you'll get a 20-25% increase in any following crop because of the soil conditioning. It's self-mulching. What happens when you grow them at the right spacing, all the fan leaves fall down and mulch the soil and smother the weeds. So you end up, you don't need the herbicides, you don't need to cultivate. It's just absolutely magic, hemp farming. Right? The seed is the most nutritious, concentrated food in existence. The truth will out, right? But how long it takes. But there has been movement towards amending the schedule, Right, because how long can you maintain a lie in the face of a tsunami of evidence to the contrary?
For quite a while.
Yeah, it's worked for 70 years, but their lies are coming apart. Right, so yeah, speak your truth, but in the meantime we'll use the jury system as our little weapon to bludgeon them into submission.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just following on from that, the question is why? What's involved in changing over from cotton to hemp? The hemp's using a quarter of the water that the cotton is, and the cotton industry's destroying our outback towns and.
That's a big question, because New South Wales inland has been sort of destroyed by American-owned cotton farms. They basically raped our water supply and all the rest of it. I mean, they installed pumps at Cubby Station so big that they could stop the Murray River flowing, right? We haven't done exhaustive agricultural research, but we've looked at growing hemp, not to replace the cotton totally, but to do co-culture. So instead of having like 10,000 hectares of cotton, you put 1,000 hectares, then hemp, then cotton, and you break up the boll weevil that way. And gradually, as the machinery for processing the hemp fibre comes online, we'll phase one to the other. Right? In Australia, we'd be really interested, and we tried through some of the textile mills that used to exist here before Howard's policy closed them all, of mixing hemp fibre with wool. Right? In Normandy in France, there's a fabric called belinge, which has been used by the fishermen up there in really harsh conditions, where they have 50% hemp, 50% wool in their jumpers. They're evidently fantastic. That would be something we could do also. But yeah, cotton would be dramatically improved by co-culturing with hemp, and gradually, you know, it would become the minor crop and hemp the major crop. But that could be like a 10-year transition. But yeah, it can be made to work. Listen, the boll little caterpillar does eat the hemp plant. And I was growing up at Spring Ridge in Corindi, which is on the edge of the cotton growing area. And we put them right next to cotton because we wanted to see if the plants would be attacked. And yeah, the caterpillar started up, and I just sort of sat there watching it, and it was eating the leaf, and I thought, I'm going to squash this bastard. Then all of a sudden it just dropped off, dead. See, the part of the problem, because this is a real big issue too. See, we started the hemp movement back in 1988 because of the damage of cotton to the inland areas, and we thought, let us breed the variety of hemp that's most toxic to the boll weevil. But the bloody government right from the start said, no, you've got to comply with the THC. They were just fixated on us going to 0.3% THC. Luckily now we've got 0.5 and 1% for a non-reproducing crop. But what should be done is forget about drug testing and all the expenses and some dickhead coming along to examine your crop and things like that, and breed for boll resistance. So you put the crops in, spread them out, see which one does the best, and then breed that up. That's what we should be doing, and it makes it relatively easy to move towards organic agriculture. Right? Most people aren't aware cannabis was grown. I mean, there's some argument to be made for the fact that this country was settled by the British to be a hemp colony, and they were going to grow a lot of hemp because prior to that they used to get it from Russia, and hemp was essential for sail and rigging for the world's navies, but there wasn't the processing facilities or the expertise, and by the time they developed, we went to steam power and you didn't need the same volume of hemp, right? But in the old days, they used to plant like a windbreak of hemp around their vegetable gardens, and it seemed to keep the moths and caterpillars away and protect the plants as well. So it has a great range hemp is organic agricultural's friend, right? It makes it really easy. Yeah. Is that enough?
Can I ask a question, please?
That's what everyone else is doing.
They said about eating fresh cannabis. So if you could grow it fresh for 6 months, what do you do for the other 6 months?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I have a second question. My husband has cancer, and we've tried to do as much research as we can, but there's so many experts get online, it does genetic, and you get twice as confused. You're saying eat fresh. They said, lots of them have said that it needs to be heated for the THC to kick in, and that's what kicks the cancer.
Yeah, okay. That's basically the controversy between the fresh and the Rick Simpson. Now, in terms of year-round supply, when you say fresh, we didn't really say fresh. What we said is unheated. So, for instance, say you get a good outdoor crop, what I'd do then is dry it, not to bone dryness, just dry it, put it in containers, ideally vacuum packed, and store them in the freezer. That stops the decarboxylation process, and then you can just use the buds. So it's the fact that it's non-decarboxylated, not the fact that it's green on a plant, right? That's the first thing. The second thing, the controversy between what they call activated has not been settled at all, right? And it may come down to horses for courses, right? But what I've found with Rick Simpson treatments, firstly, it's very, very expensive to get like a pound of cannabis, make it into oil, then take it over sort of 60 days. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of people simply can't tolerate it, and there's a huge dropout rate of doing a Rick Simpson treatment. Right? I'm not saying they haven't got good results, but what you would first try, and it becomes empirical because, you know, the knowledge isn't there, you start with the unheated one, see how you progress. If you're losing ground, as the next recourse, so there's a sort of a hierarchy that I approach. Right, so say you're treating something, you might start with a CBD dominant unheated. If that doesn't do what you want, a THC dominant unheated. Then if that doesn't do what you want, you go to the Rick Simpson style oils. Right? But we can't give a definitive answer because there's been successes and failures with both. And in many ways, see the dose. Someone asked me what the dose of things are. When you're dealing with, say, children with epilepsy, it's damn easy because you just start them off at a small dose, gradually titrate it up and titrate it against effect. Are they seizing? Are they better off? Are they doing well at school? All those sort of things. But with cancer, because it's sort of like a disaster in slow motion, you know, things move by months. You don't know if the tumour's regressing and things like that. It comes down to how the patient is feeling. Are they able to get out of bed easily and go and do some major activity? Right? Now, the trouble with the decarboxylated cannabis, a lot of people, they're just couch locked, basically. I mean, the first lady I treated with Rick Simpson oil way back in the early 90s, I mean, she spent 18 hours a day semi-conscious on the sofa. I mean, it did help the tumour somewhat, but after a while she couldn't tolerate taking those doses and she went off it, right? There may be a time, and I mean, these things are evolving, right? But my approach is primarily dietetic with the raw cannabis, and if you fail, then the heated, right? The trouble is in the whole cannabis, sort of, especially the Americans, people make up their mind and then push it as a fact, right? And they seem incapable of saying, I don't know that. I don't know what's best in this instance or that instance, right? And it is an empirical thing for people. Does that, I mean, that's an unsatisfactory answer, but that's the answer. So we use the raw because you can probably use it in lower doses, it's better tolerated, it's more likely to have a positive effect by not having the patient drop out due to intolerance. Huh?
So the raw is different leaves.
What's that?
Is when you're talking raw, are you just talking about the leaf?
No, you've got to be careful. Because, I mean, if you say leaf, I mean, then you're talking about the fan leaves. There's different sorts of leaves on the hemp plant. When you look at a big pot plant, you've got those big fan leaves, right? The fan leaves have very little medicine in them. Some people with inflammatory bowel disease seem to do fairly well by just juicing those. Okay, that's good. But on the whole, they're the ones that fall down and mulch around the plant. Then you've got the little sugar leaves. The way I assess what's to be used for medicine, have a look with a microscope, not a microscope, a magnifying glass, or if your eyes are good enough, if they've got trichomes. See, some of the better plants, they've got trichomes all the way down to the main stalk, right? The trichomes are where the medicine is. There are some intracellular cannabinoids that aren't trichome cannabinoids, but on the whole, I wouldn't throw out a stalk that's full of trichomes, right? I mean, you can use that for all sorts of things, extraction and stuff. Okay? Yeah, sorry, that's where it's up to.
It's hard when you're a beginner because there's so many experts around and they just...
We say, as a has-been, a spurt's a drip under pressure. Most of the people who claim to be experts are just that.
You got enough time?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, for harvesting the plant, do you wait for trichomes to go amber?
Change, yeah.
Or do you just wait till they're, like, you know,
Yeah, the question is the optimal time to harvest.
Yeah.
It seems with some of the CBD plants that the CBD content increases towards the end, and harvesting too early, you may not get as much. So, yeah, the first sign of any opacity would be a reasonable time. But see, I mean, in reality, sometimes factors other than ideal. You know, if the helicopter came over yesterday, you're not going to say, oh, they're not opaque yet, I'll just wait a bit longer. I don't think so, right? Or if the rain's coming or something like that, you know, but that's, you know, that's been worked out. I think that's reasonable to say that's when it's optimised. Yeah. But usually circumstances overtake. Is there any other questions?
How much heating is heating?
Okay, yeah, it's what you call area under the curve, right? By that I mean if you've got a time temperature graph, it's the total amount. So for instance, if you smoke a joint and it gets over, I think it's about 150 or something like that for just a moment, it's almost 100% decarboxylated, right? If you sit it on a shelf at room temperature, it might take 12 months to decarb by 50%, right? If you set it, say, at 70 degrees, it might take a month. So it's area under the curve. The higher the temperature, the shorter the time. The lower the temperature, the longer the time. If you stick it in a freezer vacuumed, you can almost stop the decarboxylation. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. And it doesn't have to be absolute, right? I mean, just majority decarboxylate, but drying it and putting it in the freezer in an airtight container, it'll keep for ages.
I was thinking more in terms of creating oils.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm sort of not as pushing of the oil as it used to be for a number of reasons. Because you can use the bud, and also, I mean, if you are caught, see, they've put oil in a bizarre category. So an oil in legal terms is any liquid containing any amount of THC. So I had 8 litres of olive oil infused with mixed CBD THC. It was only 4 milligrams a mil because we were dosing some of the kids with like 5 mils instead of 1 drop and things, because you can make mistakes with the drop. It was just one way of doing it. So instead of being in a 25 mil container, we sent them in a 250 mil container. It was just easier to handle, right? But the way the law is done, I think if you have 10 grams of oil, you're called a large commercial producer. So if you have 8 litres, you're sort of, you know, Pablo Escobar or something like that. And that gets serious, because then you're in what they call show cause for bail. So I had 3 mongrel judges refuse me bail, right? That's why I spent time in. I finally got to the Court of Appeal and ran my own case and got bail, right? So having the bud, you can have like kilos of bud and you're not large commercial. You know, they've just misplaced the oil in a much worse category. They're so stupid, they would treat olive oil with a bit of THC in it much more worse than resin, right? It's just bizarre. Resin might be 60 or 70% cannabinoids, and you can have more resin for less penalty than oil. You know, they're just scientific illiterate morons, hey? Yeah.
Be the same then with tincture.
Hey?
Be the same then with the tincture.
Yeah, but I mean, when are we going to use a tincture with the alcohol in it? I mean, that's more if people want to. It shouldn't be real predominant way, especially for children. I mean, it doesn't even enter into the equation, right? Yeah. I mean, tincture, the spray and things are very useful, and we're trying to develop the best rescue remedy, something that'll work really quick. But it seems like topical application can also function in that regard. So unless you really want to have an alcohol base, there's not a big place for it. Yeah.
Is it true an alcohol base is better for brain tumours, like through the blood-brain barrier? Is it true? Not true?
I'd find it hard to believe it's true, because otherwise all the piss heads would be sort of healthier than us, you know. I really don't think so, right? Yeah. Because the concentration, by the time you absorb the alcohol, there's not enough alcohol in your blood, even if it's 0.5 or something like that, to hold any of the cannabis. Yeah.
Andrew, why do you think the sonocator is a good way of getting
I mean, I started using a sonicator more for the media, because what I wanted to demonstrate was that parents could make oil safely without solvents in their home. But the sonicator is just a way of accelerating steeping, I mean, you can make a perfectly good medicine by putting the buds in olive oil and in the dark cupboard and just shaking them every now and then, but the sonicator just shakes it a lot and makes it sort of a more uniform. But it was sort of pseudo-scientific, because when like 7:30 Report did a story, I just show this and the thing went ding and it was sort of a bit of theatre, but it is a useful way. But I'm more and more moving towards just using the bud in a smoothie, so it doesn't become, it's a moot point. But this way we could show, the idea of me actually taking it onto TV was to say, look, parents can do this, it's reproducible, you know what the bud concentration is, you just put the same amount in the same volume and you get the same result. Right, so what was the question? Why is it good? Yeah, it's just a nice way of, because it accelerates. So like the more you shake it, the more transfer there is into the carrier, but the sonication does it by ultrasound, so it's just much more efficient. Yeah, but there's nothing more efficient than just having the whole bud, and it's so easy, and it cuts the pharmaceutical argument to bits if you get good results for it. Yeah.
But it's more natural, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not being processed.
Yeah.
Olive oil or hemp oil? Some people say.
Okay, yeah. No, that's, look, well, I first started using MCT oil because it seemed like a good idea, medium chain triglyceride oil, but then I found out that MCT oil extracted from coconuts, the major world supplier was Orinco, which is an ammunition and explosives manufacturer, and they were mostly servicing the bodybuilding industry, right? Mostly it's well tolerated and it's certainly a good carrier, but in the occasional kid there's some GI upset. Olive oil is an MCT oil. It has medium chain triglycerides and it's excellent because it's made in Australia. It's a whole product. You don't need to go and sort of rape the third world and get their coconuts and then put it through a big industrial. I'm absolutely against using hemp seed oil. Absolutely against it for this reason. Firstly, I consider pressing a hemp seed for hemp seed oil is a complete waste of that hemp seed, right? And for this reason. Once you've separated the oil from the protein matrix that it's in and the abundant quantities of vitamin E to prevent its rancidity, no matter how carefully you treat the oil, if you do it very low pressure extraction and then put it in a freezer, there's still degradation. But more important than that, I mentioned the cofactors, the B group vitamins, the minerals and the vitamin E, they're left in that protein cake. And because I've gone through an industrial process, they're also going rancid, right? Hemp seed oil has a very minimal shelf life. See, olive oil will last for years because it doesn't go rancid, but by the nature of polyunsaturated oils, they go rancid really quickly, and it's just a ridiculous way to do it, right? It's absolutely wrong. It might sound like a good idea, hemp seed oil, but you're basically handing an oil with no protection and it'll rapidly go off. Is that clear? Because I feel really strongly about that. I hate seeing hemp seed oil.
What about if you mix the hemp seed oil with the olive oil?
What's that?
If you mix the hemp seed oil...
Yeah, but what's the advantage? You still destroyed the hemp seed. You can't improve on the hemp seed in the whole form. And the best way to have them is just whip them up in a blender and drink them, right? So they're well absorbed and they're totally fresh and you're getting 100% of the oils in a non-rancid form. I mean, you don't gain it. It's only half as bad rather than twice as good. Hey? Yeah.
You mean dehulled seed, no? Dehulled.
Yeah.
Does that go with hemp seed oil as a fish oil replacement?
No, hemp seed is a fish oil replacement, right? Not hemp seed oil. Because, look, I'll just explain it again. I went through it briefly before. The plant form of omega-3, there's 3 types of omega-3, right? But there's only one essential form. The essential form is alpha-linolenic acid, which is 18 carbons long. And even when the animals, like fish, they only get their omega-3 because they eat algae and things which have got the alpha-linolenic acid. Right? If you've got the right cofactors, the B group vitamins and the minerals, you then change that one, you modify the 18 carbon to 20 carbons and 22, which is then called DHA and EPA. That's called marine omega-3. But if you just take marine omega-3, you're not getting the ALA, and your body can't make the right amount of DHA and EPA in the right quantities if you just sort of slam them in your face by yourself. right? If you take hemp seed oil as a replacement for fish oil, you find it difficult to elongate the alpha-linolenic acid because you don't have the cofactors because you piss them off in that protein cake. Just the seed, mate. It's got the lot, eh? It's a perfect, and it's not a substitute for fish oil. It's a vastly superior alternative, right? Fish oil is bizarre. I mean, it does have benefit because people are so deficient in omega-3, but it's so short of the total benefit that can be derived by proper omega-3 nutrition. Huh? Yeah.
Is olive oil just olive oil or?
Yeah.
Preferably Australian. Don't get that bloody heat-extracted Spanish olive oil or the adulterated oils. I'll just tell you something about cold-pressed oils, right? I mean, it's a bit like free-range chooks. You know, the legal definition of a free-range chook is 2 to the square metre, right? 2 to the square metre is free-range? I don't think so. Same with cold-pressed. See, cold-pressed has a legal definition, and the legal definition is no external heat is added to the expeller. Right? But if you know, the expeller is the screw that winds into the oil and squeezes the oil out. But if you do the expeller under very high pressure, your expeller head can go up to 300 degrees and so you can still call it cold pressed because you haven't added external heat, it's internal heat. Right? So you've got to be careful. At least the Australian olive oils, I think without exception, because it's a fairly regulated industry, are what they say they are. If they say cold-pressed virgin, that's what they are. Whereas a lot of the overseas ones aren't. That's why they're selling so much cheaper. So go on quality rather than price. And also think of the Australian farmers. Say you're paying 20% more, pay it. You're getting a better product and also you'll have ripples. You'll feel better about yourself. Have 20% less, right? So you're spending the same amount of money. But I'm fairly big on that. I mean, I don't want to be a mad nationalist, but I think you've got to look after your own. Right? But I just missed your question though. What was the question?
Yeah, because it's so many different olive oils.
Oh yeah, okay. Buy Australian, right? And yeah, the Australian oil is well regulated and is what it says it is. Whereas there's been scandals over the last couple of years with adulteration, just as there is with the honey. Right? A lot of bloody sugar thrown into the honey, mate. It's a crime. Or corn fructose. God help us all. Well, yeah.
That's from the hemp seed itself, but it's being...
Yeah, sure. Okay, watch this. You've got a perfect food, 100% of everything. You squeeze out the oil, which is 30%, and you've got the protein cake, which is the rest of the 70%, right? What are Australians short of? Australians aren't short of protein, right? They're short of omega oils. So what's the point of eating the protein? Now, I'm not against putting hemp protein, say, into various breads and things like that. It will improve them, but it means you've wasted the hemp seed, right? I mean, the only reason we actually had a hemp seed oil industry here in the first place, it was illegal to use the seed. So the oil was just an entry into it, but it's not one that I'd stay with, right? It's just a waste of a rare resource, and you're underutilising the nutritional benefits. Yeah. Eh?
The seeds are more whole.
Yeah, the seeds are whole. But they also look after themselves, right? The oil, you've got to believe how reactive cannabis oil is. And all the polyunsaturated, you just have to put a bit of light on. See, they put oils out there on the shelf with the sunlight on them. They're being destroyed at a rate of knots. Right? You really have to look after it. Hemp seed, I mean, I don't even like to see hemp seed on a shelf. They keep much better in a fridge, right? We have to look after our food. I've covered that, but I mean the minimum amount, in my opinion, is 40 grams, that's 4 heaped tablespoons, and 1 or 2 heaped tablespoons of chia seed. That's the minimum amount. You can go to 2 or 3 times that and substitute. You can substitute hemp seed and berry smoothies for any meal as a meal replacement, but no less than 40 grams, right? And in invalid diets and in transitional diets from cancer and things, you could do a lot more than that. So we're sort of developing not only sweet recipes like fruit smoothies, but also savoury things like salad dressings and other things like that. But yeah, don't limit it, because anything you substitute with hemp seed, you've improved your overall diet and nutrition. Yeah, okay.
What's the fibre profile for hemp seed?
It's not an issue, right? I mean, the hemp seed you have for the omega-3, for the protein, for the minerals, for the B group vitamins, your fibre you get from your vegetables and fruits. Yes, just not an issue.
So there's not much fibre in
No. No.
And Andrew, you don't have to soak them first, the seeds, before you ingest them? Or...
They possibly become rather more digestible, right? But either way, right? See, when you say, this is something I'd really like to do, because people talk about hemp sprouts, and I'm just wondering if we actually improve the nutritional profile. But the way I see it is when people say activate, right? It's really soaking, like you said. There's possibly conversion of oil to other things, like the oil, right? So we haven't sort of been able to test, say, the omega-3 level in the unsoaked seed versus the soaked. But it's no doubt that they seem to be better digested. But if you cut them up in a blender, it's not. But either way, I wouldn't make a big issue. But one day we'll have the ability to just like measure the omegas both ways and optimise it. Yeah. That's enough.
How are you going with the processing, getting the processing plant for hemp going? You were saying last one.
Yeah. Sad, right? We had a hemp decorticator, which we'd sort of rescued from a bombed out factory in Croatia years ago, and we're hoping to set it up in the Hunter Valley with Bob Doyle's mill. Bob made a grievous mistake as far as I'm concerned and chose to find some other machine which is now broken down, and the mill's sort of stalled, and our machine's gone off to West Australia. We've lost control of it. So yeah, the whole problem, and this is a big problem, is how we're going to industrialise, how we're going to move from chicken shit scale to really big scale, right? And the way I see it at the political level, we'll probably have to have something. See, it's a bit like trying to pick yourself up from your bootlaces. No one's going to build a hemp processing line to take it right through to textiles unless there's a sufficient supply of fibre, and no one's going to plant the plant unless there's a mill to take the fibre. The way to break that impasse would be we could have a government that actually bought hemp fibre and stored it for 3 or 4 years, and then people would be more encouraged to set up the mill, to borrow the money that's needed, knowing there was an adequate supply. It's going to be hard to jumpstart this industry without government support unless we get some major long-term financial sort of involvement, but not easy. They're trying to sort of strangle us in the cradle, basically. They won't succeed, but yeah, they can hold it back a bit. Yeah.
So I reckon we should have a break. And Radical is going to do an extraction. He's going to press some oil up under that, the tree right up the back in the shady spot. You might have seen him yesterday. Yeah, he's got a heat press set up there. So thank you so much, Doc. And I'm going to try and talk him into, if you're staying around, we might have a panel later on and drag you back out. But have a break for maybe 3/4 of an hour, then Dr. Deb is coming in. Thanks, Andrew.